So I guess we can start now. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We're going to start our event called I Need a Job. In the past few decades, we have witnessed far-reaching changes to our economy. The way we produce quality jobs in the past and the way we create them today has evolved significantly. For us to better understand how we access better jobs, we must also understand how quality jobs are created. Our goal today is to provide an understanding on how our economy has changed so we can more effectively tackle the challenge of job creation and economic growth. There will be many perspectives shared in this webcast. We do our best to bring forward highly credible research and panelists. We encourage you to think about what is shared, and we encourage you to also poke holes in the arguments presented. So we're going to kick this off by introducing our four panelists. First off, we have Greg Hart. Greg Hart is a design partner at Thin Air Labs, an innovation investment company working on economic development in Calgary. Greg is the founder of Inception University and is the co-founder of AlwaysBLU Inc, a startup that produces carbon negative plastics. He is a lifetime entrepreneur, and the unifying theme across his endeavors is making life more livable for everyone. We're also grateful to have Elisabeth Perlman. She's an economist at the Center for Economic Studies at the US Census Bureau, studying innovation and patenting in both the 19th and 21st centuries, and more broadly interested in factors that influence the direction of science and innovation. Bitsy, who she would like us to call her Bitsy, because that's what she said when we met last time. Bitsy completed a PhD in economics at Boston University, where she explored the role of density, transportation systems, and networks in advancing innovation. Next up, we have Haider Hassan. Haider is the CEO of Immigration Services Calgary, an organization dedicated to helping newcomers to Canada get settled and successfully integrated. An immigrant himself, Haider and his family moved from Pakistan to Canada in 1999. Since then, he co-founded Full Soul Canada, an organization that provides hospitals in Uganda with medical supplies. He has worked at several financial institutions in wealth management and served on the Premier's Council on Charities and Civil Society. In 2018, he was awarded one of Calgary's top 40 under 40. And last but not least, we have Court Ellingson. Court is the Vice President, Research and Strategy at Calgary Economic Development. He is the steward of the creation and implementation of Calgary's new economic strategy, Calgary and the New Economy. Court also serves on the board for Calgary Arts Academy and Sustainable Calgary. Last but not least, actually, is I want to welcome William Aboki. He's working the back end of this event, and I want to thank him for taking his time to volunteer to help us out. So welcome to our webcast, I Need a Job. Okay, so we're going to frame much of this conversation around industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution centered around the use of machines in the production of goods instead of handmade products produced by artisans. The second saw widespread expansion of the use of electrical power, telephones, and railway systems, leading to a wave of globalization. Electronics, telecommunications, and computers were emblematic of the third revolution. And each industrial revolution required investments to participate. For instance, in the second industrial revolution, there was a requirement for investment in infrastructure like factories, railways, and access to large amounts of energy. A lack of investment also led to the delay in the capacity of a region to participate in that new revolution. And now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, an era which is being seen by the World Economic Forum as the merging of our physical, digital, and biological worlds. Like the previous industrial periods, it also has unique requirements to participate. So my first question for our panelists is, how would you describe the fourth industrial revolution? And if you could pick one key ingredient that enables participation in this industrial period, what would that be? So I think what we'll do is we'll start this off with Bitsy, if you don't mind commenting on that.
Thank you. So I was thinking about this in the document before we started, and one of the things that's true is you don't invite an academic if you want simple answers or you want things categorized neatly. So I was trying to think through how I understood these different industrial revolutions, and the third industrial revolution, I think, is less accepted in our sort of historiography than the first two. So I kind of want to frame it around something which this picture does, which is general purpose technologies. So what is the general purpose technology that's really driving this? How is it playing out? So as it says in the first one, I think steam power is really the general purpose technology. And I think in the second one, it's really electricity, and it does not mention on this slide, but also the invention of the periodic table in science and chemistry. And then the third one, you know, according to the way this is poured out, is going to be the transistor, and I don't think it's specifically on there, but plastic. And it's really hard for me to see these as having fully run their course. I think that we're still really pushing the transistor as a general purpose technology. The transistor is being miniaturized, it's coming into our home, and it's really relying on plastics. It's relying on some other technologies, right? Small batteries, and what I think you're really getting at, which is ubiquitous communication. Right? So I think that that's probably what we're really needing right now, is just everyone needs strong internet everywhere all the time. But being a historian, I feel, you know, ill-equipped to predict the trends of the future. So I can say, like, that's where we are now, and certainly we've done some other things with biology before, right? You can think of vaccines as being sort of biologically enhanced immune system, and maybe we're going to push that way there. But I don't see strong evidence of medicine as doing anything but sort of pushing on the course that it's been on for a while. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. From an academic, it does. I remember writing a proposal at work, and it was 31 pages with 112 references. And so I definitely understand complexity and your need to kind of dive into that complexity for sure. I was wondering if maybe Greg could maybe chime in with regards to this question. And how would you describe the fourth industrial revolution? And if you could pick one ingredient, what would that be?
Well, it's interesting. I'll start with one of the things that Bitsy mentions, which I think is really important, which is the concept of access. If from passing from the third to the fourth industrial revolution, the ability to have ubiquitous communication that's connected to computing power is something that's just become part of the background, so to speak, then the access that people have to that becomes incredibly important. And we're already seeing that in the COVID situation where, you know, kids are being forced into school from home, and then all of a sudden they don't have good internet connection, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So there's a definite access issue, which is there. If I was to look more like at the general purpose technology kind of way of looking at it, like, to me, the thing that makes this fourth revolution so interesting is that now we have computers that can build on themselves. So, I mean, that to me is, when I'm looking at the future right now, like, that's something that's a really big game changer for the way that the future can unfold. And it has big implications for speed. And I also think it has big implications for variation. And of course, that's, you know, not disconnected from human designers, obviously, but there is still a reality that we're in a situation now where computers can actually create on themselves, right? It's not waiting for us to do the original programming all the time.
And that dives into actually the next question I wanted to ask. around how technology builds upon itself. So in his presentation at Singularity U, Pascal Finette said that the change we'll see in the next 100 years will equal the change we've seen in the past 20,000 years. I mean, we've heard it all before, right? Bill Gates famously said that we overestimate what can be done in 1 year and underestimate what can be done in 5 or 10 years. So Finette bases his belief on the idea that technology builds upon itself. Consider a computer has led to mobile phones that are more powerful than the first spaceship that took us to the moon, the Apollo 11. Advancements in computing power has led to machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is leading to robots such as NASA's Robonaut 2. Now this leads to my next question. Do you think we'll see enough change in the next 100 years that will equal change we've seen in the past 20,000 years? Or is that just a statement to get everyone excited or interested about what's happening? And, you know, I was wondering, Court, if you don't mind chiming in on your thoughts on this idea.
Wow. You know, I'm not sure that I'm, you know, smart enough or prescient enough to look 100 years ahead and know like whether or not that change is going to equal the last 20,000. But I've certainly heard people talk about this before. And, you know, like if we're going back 20,000 years, you know, the step change up to an agrarian society was pretty monumental and had, you know, profound impacts on civilization. And so I think that, you know, like, you know, what we look back and think, wow, that's, you know, so simple, but the change on civilization was profound. And I guess for me, the question maybe is the technological change in the next 100 years going to be, you know, as profound on civilization in our lives as it has been for the last 20,000 years? I think that's a pretty big thing to overcome from where we were 20,000 years ago to where we are today. But is the question about whether or not is the pace of change going to accelerate, and is it, you know, like, you know, is it the fact that computers can build upon themselves, does that, you know, take it away from our ability to even really predict where things are going to go and what 100 years from now is going to look like? Maybe. I think there's no question that what is to come is going to be incredible, and most of us won't be able to wrap our heads around it.
The reason I went to Court with that question, because I expected him to take it to the other direction of maybe not, but I know Greg is going to pull it back to the other direction. So Greg, what are your thoughts on Pascal Finette's comment there?
Well, it's funny when you were mentioning it, and when I was listening to Court, the thing that was actually, especially Court's mention of the move to the agrarian society, that, you know, that there's an enormous amount of our history and even, you know, religious development and everything, which is really anchored in the huge changes that meant for humans. So like to go from very tribal societies to ones that were more sedentary and where you had mixing of different kinds of people and everything, that was a huge move. So, I mean, when you look at that, two things that strike me are, one, we haven't changed at all in the 20,000 years. So the humans that are on this call right now, same bodies, same brains as 20,000 years ago. So that's a real problem when we look at a future that's going to be accelerating at the pace that it is, and where we have technology that's building upon itself, because it was a big enough shift to go through some of the other shifts that we've been through. So the question is, is that going to be that much change in the next 100 years? It's certainly not outside the realm of possibility, because there's no way to know. I mean, there's like an almost infinite range of possibility now, which you couldn't have said that before, but it is getting in that direction. But I think what's interesting is that's paired up with the fact that the humans, unless we get really busy with CRISPR and start changing the humans, we still have all the same things that are with us right now. And we're already seeing, just from ubiquitous communications, the impact of taking those same mindsets and mixing them with these kinds of technologies. So yeah, there could be lots of change, some of it filled with promise and some of it filled with peril.
So that leads into my next question. So we talk about change and rapid change. And the next question, I'm going to turn to Hyder to take a first go at this. But prior to launching Imagine Cities, I used to publish a blog where I told stories about innovations in places we once considered third world. I wanted to push against the idea that these regions didn't have high levels of innovation and creativity. Countries that were once considered third world in my lifetime are now economic powerhouses. Shenzhen is a fishing village in 1980 and now produces the third highest GDP in China. Pune University in India is known as the Harvard of the East, while Bangalore created 123 new startups in 2018 alone, and is ranked 26th in the world's most innovative ecosystems. The African continent, we're talking about 54 countries. 6 out of the top 15 of the fastest growing economies are on that continent. The region is home to 600 tech hubs and raised $2.2 billion in startup capital in 2019. So my question to you, Hyder, is do you think our perceptions of these parts of the world, could it possibly lead to a significant blind spot in our ability to recognize not only increasing potential competition, but also opportunity? What are your thoughts?
And that hits home for us at Immigrant Services Calgary because we are trying to build a case for support to attract the best of the best. And it's interesting that you put all those countries in there. The second piece is that we have this gateway program that we launched to do exactly what you asked me. Because how can Calgary and Alberta and Canada be the best of the best in the world? And our point system of immigration helps attract the best of the world. Actually, a lot of people don't know that we are actually the number one in the world when it comes to that. For example, our new immigration minister was invited on from the chancellor in Germany on a roundtable to see how Canada is doing immigration and attracting talent. That leads me to my second point. Calgary, we're proud because we won a technological bid towards the Gateway program, the Gateway to Canada program. So we're using technologies such as blockchain, digital wallet to connect and do talent matching. I can go on and on. There's a lot of interesting things in that. But I think if you look at it at a high level, you know, look at the pandemic right now. I mean, who would have known? I mean, right now we're even debating if we should hire people globally, you know, because that geographical aspect has changed overnight. And when we're doing blockchain research, it's interesting. Estonia is the #1 country in the world that is providing blockchain disruption. And if you look at Estonia's history, again, it's a small Eastern European nation. It would fall under the same ranking that you're seeing here, but their entire government is running on blockchain. You can actually become an e-resident of Estonia all online and in a secure environment. And I think it was a testimonial, but Bill Gates actually became an e-resident just to support that innovation. So I would agree, these countries here, I'm really excited to see, actually, you mentioned Ethiopia there. That's one of the top countries that we're seeing in Calgary in terms of innovation. Now, I'll supplement that with the last point. Our business is we're in the business of skills matching. So when companies that are innovative approach Calgary economic development and they choose Calgary as their home, we want to be able to provide a skills matrix through blockchain-enabled technologies so that we can give CEOs the straight goods right away if we have the skill set. So we're really excited about this. We have a 5-year pilot. It's starting from Calgary. I think it could become a national story on how to do it right.
But do you think because of the rising capabilities of these parts of the world that the pool of talent to come to Canada is going to reduce? It's not going to be as strong.
Pool of talent in the home country or the host country?
In the home country. So if I'm living in Ethiopia, right, and my country is picking up pace and we're inventing and we're creating solutions,
Right.
And I'm getting the quality of life in Ethiopia
Yes.
that other, first world nations have.
Yep.
Like, do you feel that because they're increasing their capacities,
Right.
do you think that they'll still come, right? Like, and we're
Yes.
dependent on immigration.
The answer is yes, because the reason why I have a maple leaf in my background is because I think we are in the best country in the globe because we provide the best sense of belonging. And under sense of belonging comes research, thousands and thousands of pages of research on what causes social determinants of health and indicators that do that. And Canada is great for that. We create that sense of belonging. So I think it's a qualitative answer, but I think because the culture that we created, one of my sociology profs at Waterloo talked about the salad bowl versus the melting pot. And maybe Bitsy can actually provide a little bit more context because she's more qualified than I am. But he said that Canada is like the salad bowl. It doesn't matter where you come from and what skill sets you bring, you're still part of the salad. Whereas the States, it's almost like a melting pot. You have to transform or morph into something else. So I think as long as we embrace our diversity and inclusion and create a positive environment for the world's global talent to come here, I think we'll have a chance to be number one. I mean, a quick example of that is we've got some ads out in the States right now, and especially in California, to attract IT talent that's actually stuck there because some of the policies that the government has enacted. And we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs coming to Calgary and settling here. So again, this is just a recent example. This is not even like looking in the future. So I think we've got the key ingredients to create a best-in-class country. So I think innovation will go from like a hub and spoke model to more like globalized innovation. For example, I come from Waterloo. It's a young university. I mean, it just was created 50 years ago. How come Kitchener-Waterloo, we were talking about BlackBerry before we joined the call. I mean, so the innovators of BlackBerry were from the same city, and now it's become a hub of innovation because of all the talent that it attracts. It's actually from some of these countries that you listed as well. People know that, Canada provides that environment as a hotbed for innovation and the fail fast forward mentality.
I feel like I should play the national anthem, the Canadian national anthem, Hyder. Your love for this country is just amazing. So William's telling me I need to move on. So I'm just gonna quickly tell you what this is about, okay? And then we'll move on to the next area of conversation. So an ecosystem, right? For those of you who don't know what an ecosystem is, think of a car and think of what it needs in order to function. And if you improve a component within that car, like the engine, the car performs better. So economic development is no different. We heard from our panelists, they mentioned some of the things that we need in that ecosystem. And we'll get into some more of those ingredients later in the conversation. But I can't find this piece of research anymore, so don't quote me on this. But Brookings Institute published a paper that essentially said that cities need to focus their resources into particular industries rather than going carte blanche and investing in everything. They argued that every economy cannot build high-performing ecosystems in every industry. The reason is that it costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. Some estimate it takes about a decade to develop a brand new ecosystem and to ensure that it's high-performing. So, Court, I'm going to ask you to answer this as quickly as possible. What are your thoughts on that? On the idea that economies can't be everything to everyone, and they need to focus on their strengths?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can be everything to everyone, but that doesn't mean that we need to ignore some of the shoots of possibility. If it was possible to build a brand new ecosystem from scratch in 10 years, wow, I think Calgary would be much better off today than we are. How long have we been working at it, Craig? But I think it's true, you know, like historically, there's certainly, you know, in the past, there would have been core components that you would build an ecosystem up around, and it takes a really long time. And it does take a lot of energy and a lot of concerted effort. And organic growth maybe is part of it, but it does take a lot of energy and effort to pull together an ecosystem, to understand what it is that you need to build an ecosystem and pull in the expertise and the resources and the global connections and everything that goes along with it to advance it. And kind of one of the examples that I use for Calgary is that, you know, that everybody knows us as, well, anybody who knows Calgary as an oil and gas, as an energy city. We started building our oil and gas ecosystem in the 20s, right? Like it took us, you know, 80 years or 90 years to get to the Calgary energy ecosystem that you see today. It didn't happen overnight, and the next one won't happen overnight either. Does take a lot of energy, and I think even in Calgary in our economic strategy, you know, we talk about what our core bench strengths are. We talk about, should we be looking at innovation around energy, where we've already got such a, you know, bench strength of smart people that have been innovating in energy for quite some time, and, you know, can we just push the margin a little bit? But then also look at kind of other core sectors of our economy and say, isn't that an easier place to start? Isn't it easier for us to look at, you know, that 20% of the research at the University of Calgary is in life science? Wouldn't it be easier for us to build an ecosystem up around that rather than a research area that doesn't exist at all at the University of Calgary? But at the same time, we can't ignore what we didn't think was there before. 3 years ago, when we were forming the economic strategy for Calgary, financial services and fintech was I guess, maybe, like people think we should put it there, but I don't see what the evidence is. Now, here we are 3 years later, and our very first $1 billion tech exit was in fintech. And from a company that had already been there for 12 years and nobody knew that it was there, nobody was paying attention. So yes, focus on what you're good at, build up around it. I really do think that that's kind of like the path of least resistance. But when you see something that has hope and opportunity, wrap some resources around it and see what happens.
Awesome. So thanks for that short answer, and that is a short answer for Court. Next up, we're just going to dive into cities, and in this new economy, we've kind of discussed what this new economy encompasses, what we think is going to happen but may not happen. So how does that apply to cities? So cities currently produce more than 80% of all economic activity, and that's expected to increase. We spoke earlier about an economy's ability to participate in the new industrial period and its dependency on specific investments. Next up, we're going to discuss how certain investments can strengthen a city's ability to meaningfully participate in the new economy. So first off, I'd like to talk about land use. The first time I heard about land use, I almost fell asleep. So stay with me. In the past, we created rules around how land could be used, and it was very much like this. You lived here, you worked over there, you played over there, you know, and nothing and you had to use a car to get there, right? For most cities. Other cities have public transportation. So most cities in North America anyways. So the way we use land has evolved over time to the point in which we now look to do all of those things in the same geographical area. So you can live here, you can go to work here, you can shop here, and you can pick up your kids from soccer here. So that is how modern cities have developed. And, you know, in Paris, for example, they said that the mayor has said that they want to build a 15-minute city. And what that means is that wherever you are in the city, you can access what you need within a short walk or bike ride. Some of the most innovative cities in the world, cities like London, Seoul, and New York, Beijing, have also taken steps to significantly reduce car use. So using a lens of economic development, why do you think some of the world's most innovative cities are making the decision to become more compact and also reduce the need for cars? And I thought to take this one on would be Bitsy. Do you want to start there?
So the simple answer, from my perspective, is something that very fine urban economist Jeffrey Lynn said to me, which is that in the 50s and 60s, we got very excited about cars. And so we built everything at the scale of cars. And what we did there is that we overshot because we were so excited and so enthusiastic about them and put so many resources in them. And so what you're seeing is us recompacting. So put that in a longer perspective. It was a very fine paper by an economist, Steve Redding, that looks at the city of London. So if you think about the city of London, that is London City, rather than the greater London area, in 1800, everyone who worked in the city of London lived in the city of London. And then with the invention of rapid transit, you saw people hollow out. Now nobody lives in the city of London. It's just businesses and other institutions. And people use rapid transit to come in. And this idea of a 15-minute city seems crazy to me because I think about all these places that you're looking at. And I'm like, well, maybe people will be able to shop and live and walk to where, their kids go to school in 15 minutes. But what they're not doing is they're not taking 15 minutes to go to work because they're all relying on massive, rapid, non-car transit systems that are connecting these cities together. So I lived in the New York suburbs for most of my life. And one of the things that really annoyed me as a young adult in the New York suburbs is that almost everything takes place in Manhattan because that's the central focus and people understand that almost everyone can get there. Even if it takes you 45 minutes, an hour and a half, that's where you can connect to, as opposed to sort of more distributed, things that you need for your life. And so I think it's a misnomer to think of us as compacting these cities. I think we're rethinking the car and we're thinking about having things close on foot and close on bike, but we're definitely not rethinking having rapid transit that gets us from far outskirts to far outskirts or far outskirts to center cities. These cities are all growing tremendously in geographic size.
So like you mentioned, cities are becoming a bit more compact in the sense that we're building more density within certain neighborhoods, employment districts, and stuff like that. So when we talk about density, I'd like or increased density, maybe not the 15-minute city. What relationship does that have with innovation? And I was hoping Greg could maybe chime in on this. Like why is a city that has more density, maybe not Manhattan type of density, why is that more open to innovation and creativity?
Well, I mean, there's the idea of critical mass, and going back to your comments about an ecosystem, we have, in order for an ecosystem to function, its parts have to be in contact with each other. There have to be an opportunity to collide, and to see actually is a really big thing. Court's story about Solium that sold for over $1 billion, and I would wager that most of the people in Calgary have no idea that the company even exists. And so that is a feature of this sort of really highly distributed, and as you showed in that diagram, of split functions, right? So Bitsy's point, I completely agree with, that the mass transit infrastructure is not going to go away, and that's going to allow people to go greater distances. What will change is not just the increasing density in places, which will have to happen because there are some legitimate sustainability, resilience issues associated with that, but also because, if I can stay at home now, as we've learned from COVID, and I can work from home, that now starts to change my expectations for the place that I live. If before it was like, well, you know what, I lived in this community with a bunch of other people who had their houses in a community, and yeah, I had to get in my car and I'd drive to go to work. And when I went to work downtown, or if I took mass transit, then I would have access to these other amenities and whatever else. But you know what, if I'm going to spend 3 or 4 or 5 of my work days a week at home, then now there's an increased pressure that those amenities need to be local to me. Because if they're not, then, you know, I'm not going to those places anymore for any other reason. And so the danger, like there's a really weird thing that's happening here right now. But at the end of the day, when it goes to the story of innovation, a lot of it has to be about collisions and about being able to see each other, like the sort of social proof of things happening, and places where I can go and collide with other people who are doing things, different things, than I'm doing, because creativity is born out of that kind of work. So, and I mean, and there are examples around the world of cities who have turned relatively on a dime. I think of some place like Lisbon that's like, in a very short period of time, made substantial strides to becoming a real innovation capital and building these ecosystems. But it's hard to do unless you have these more compact places with mixed uses all blended together. Otherwise, I don't even know what's going on in my town. And there's lots of entrepreneurs in Calgary, and myself included, who would say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we'd be struggling working on some project. And there might even be somebody, you know, that we know today that we didn't know then that would have been a great help to have known them. But because of the way everything's so spread out, work functions are separated from all the other functions, there was really no opportunity for us to be together. So there's like a physical container for innovation that needs to be created. And I mean, we can have virtual versions of that, but without the physical one, it's really difficult.
And I was thinking recently about convenience. You had brought that up, having things nearby. And, you know, I think about multi-billion-dollar companies that are built off of convenience, right? You look at Facebook, I can connect with friends. You look at Gmail, right? I can connect with folks and not have to pay for it. Well, yeah, I guess you do pay for it through data. So, Cor, I was like, how much of a driving factor is convenience? Like, I think about startups, and, you know, a lot of their pitches is around, I make life easier or better for people. So what does convenience have to do with cities? Like, do you think that is a driving force in our desire to possibly become more compact, so I can walk down the street and get a bag of milk instead of hopping in my car?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I haven't thought about it from the perspective of convenience. I think about it more kind of along the same thoughts as Greg, you know, of that container of innovation. And when we're building the ecosystem, that we want things to be easy. I guess if easy is the same definition as convenience, right? That you don't have to look hard to find for, you know, the people that you need to connect with, or the knowledge or the resources that you need, or that, you know, global connectivity, that it's to make it as easy as possible, that people don't have to look far and wide to find what they need. That's what we're trying to do here in Calgary, is we're trying to make it easy. And I guess, like, if easy is the same as convenience, and that's, you know, convenience is what drives people to be downtown. But I think I'm also more along the line of Greg, that, you know, just personally, but I think that's it. You know, like, if we're all working from home now and we're thinking about what our home life is like, that we're driven to have more of those amenities and more of those things that we want close by, for sure.
And that leads into the next set of questions I have. I called it 15-minute economic development, but based on Bitsy's comments, I'll call it 20 to 45-minute economic development. So as part of the 15-minute city effort, I thought of 15-minute economic development. And the reason I thought of that ties into the whole idea of making things a bit easier. So being an entrepreneur is hard work. There's lots to do. The assumption is that by removing unnecessary friction from an entrepreneur's path, it would result in not only more innovation, but also increase the ability to get products to market faster. 15-minute economic development is rooted in the idea that an entrepreneur can get where they need to in a 15-minute bike ride. So for this part of the conversation, I'd like to provide you with an example of this. I'm going to provide you with two examples. The first one is from the city of Cambridge. They partnered with MIT, and Bitsy is very familiar with this development. They partnered with MIT to create an innovative ecosystem called Kendall Square. And the entire ecosystem is accessible, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bitsy, within a 20-minute-ish, 25-minute bike ride. So I'm just going to play a short video for us here, and we'll come back to the conversation. Sorry, folks, I've just been notified that no one can hear, so that kind of is not good. So I'm going to fix that for us.
Is this where we should be yelling at the people on the video and telling them, you're on mute? You're on mute.
I guess let me try to clarify my comment while you're trying to fix that,
Okay.
which is, I think one of the big drivers of innovation in cities is specialization of labor. And what specialization of labor means is that we are all coming from very far around to get to our very particular job that is right for us. And so many things can happen within walking distance because we have culturally decided that cars are no longer convenient. And, you know, I'm a cyclist. I also feel this way. But the movement is not in these large innovative cities towards putting jobs where people live. It's still keeping jobs at the center so everyone from all around the city can get there and be specialized.
Did anyone want to add to that?
Well, I think I'm glad that's been raised, because actually one of the things that'd be interesting, because Hyder in particular is dealing with lots of people all the time coming from other places, and people who are coming from other places to start a life in a country don't tend to congregate, you know, in the places where all these opportunities are. Like, I mean, I think it's fascinating that in a country like Colombia, for instance, the people who are most likely to be killed in a car crash are people who don't have cars or even live in communities where cars can access those places. They get killed in the places they have to go to in order to, you know, where people do have the privilege of driving automobiles and everything. So the idea of access here is really important, and it's one of those things that we do need to group these things together. But it's the specializations, but it's really challenging, I think, in some places for people to see that opportunity, right?
So figured it out. Sorry, folks, for the technical difficulty there. So we're just going to play the video again, and we're going to come back to what Greg was just talking about. So just a few minutes here.
Kendall Square without MIT is a place, and Kendall Square with MIT is a destination. It's an attractor of talent. It's an attractor of ideas.
If we have that innovation ecosystem, not only we have a place to move the ideas of our students and faculty into the world, but we also have ways to have that innovation ecosystem, that commercial activity that influences, that benefits society, feed back into MIT. So it's extremely important to me in the 21st century that MIT is surrounded by those companies that are creating the future.
For many years, people would look at Kendall Square and kind of think, well, it's a park and ride. You'd leave the car, get on the T, and ride to Boston.
Having grown up in Cambridge, I mean, I remember you take the train to Kendall Square on a Saturday, and it was a ghost town. I mean, there was just nobody there. It was just sort of inconceivable that anything could happen there.
What I think the Kendall project allows is the opportunity to create something that will be a destination for not only our campus community, but also for the residents of Cambridge.
I think it's going to create a very vibrant community, that has a mix of residences, office buildings, academic enterprises that interact and exchange ideas on a 24/7 basis.
What we're trying to do with the Kendall Initiative is really open up the campus by creating the kinds of spaces that really invite people in. By bringing industry close to campus and enabling those collaborations, we are hopefully enhancing the ability of that knowledge that's happening in our labs and classrooms to get out into the real world and actually solve real-world problems.
It's a large mixed-use project on the transportation spine in Kendall Square, so above and around the Kendall Square T-stops.
These two sites really frame a gateway to MIT. This is a large office building that would have the MIT Museum as an anchor tenant at the lower portion of the building. And as part of that development, the two historic buildings would be renovated.
It's clearly the technology innovation hub, but we also want it to be a place where people come to meet. If students are on the campus, can feel it and taste it and touch it, they may think about, maybe this is where I want to go to school, because it becomes a reality, because it's not this walled-off place to them.
We're thinking very hard about how we can make sure that it's a space that is inviting, is welcoming, and is enticing.
To have an opportunity to bring residential right to Main Street here, to bring the new graduate housing with new capacity right here on top of the T-stop, to mix that with innovation space, retail, and open space connections really has the opportunity for us to make a dramatic change in what's happening in Kendall Square.
So although there'll be great expansion and growth for the university, there will be housing provided for the community, and there will be amenities in terms of streetscape and sidewalks, and there'll be public open space, which will be available to the public just as if they were part of the MIT community. Residents, business people, developers, MIT, all sat at the table to talk about zoning and planning issues.
The main campus was designed to enable collaboration to occur down the hallway in the corridors. And what we're doing today is still fostering those same principles, which is how can we create that interaction to essentially a city scale.
It isn't just about the next couple of years, the next 5 years, even the next 20 years. It really is about what's the campus going to feel like, look like in the next 100 years.
Okay, so that really speaks to, I think, the whole idea of how do we develop communities, and it speaks to how we develop communities for the new economy, but also how do we develop in a way in which we enable entrepreneurs to innovate quickly. So then I just wanted to show everyone a quick thing that I created here of the city of Toronto. So where I see Kendall Square is more of, manufactured. The city of Toronto here, I would say, is more organic. So to some extent anyway. So if we look here, we have Mars Discovery District. For those of you who know Mars, it's an innovation center. Across the street from that is an $100 million AI facility that they're currently constructing focused on healthcare. Over here, we have the University of Toronto's medical school. And then when you go down, University Avenue, as you can see, you have like 6 hospitals. You have 2 other university medical buildings here. And then you have, if you zoom out, you have restaurants, you have arts, so the Art Gallery of Ontario, and further down from there is an arts university. And what you create here is that capacity to, and in here is venture capital or banks. And what you enable is this environment in which someone can access a university, can access venture capital, can have spaces in which they can test out in real life their solutions. And this environment of that 15 minutes. You can definitely bike this neighborhood in 15 minutes. So I kind of wanted to hear your position around the idea that as we advance into this new economy and as we become increasingly the need to innovate at a faster pace, do you think that this plays a role in that? And are you also of the position that these kind of manufactured communities, it doesn't really, it's not natural, it's not organic, and it won't work? So I wanted to hear what if Bitsy doesn't mind chiming in on this. We had a quick conversation about this before. And she's familiar with Kendall Square. So what are your thoughts, Bitsy?
It's interesting because, of course, Kendall Square, as you saw in the video and the picture of what it was in 1981, was sort of an industrial wasteland. And I told people earlier in the conversation that I actually refused to move to Kendall in 2010 because there were none of the amenities there that I would have wanted at the time. But the city of Cambridge is, in some sense, a streetcar suburb / a town that existed. Around Harvard, there was a town. And in the other places, it was a very vibrant streetcar suburb of Boston with a lot of natural development of amenities. And so I think, MIT was in fact very able to artfully manufacture this. Just to be clear about the video you're seeing, MIT owns a lot of that land and they are a landlord and they make a ton of money on that land and on this development. And so they were able to take what was already there and sort of parlay it into more things and different things that are strong. And I think that that's very possible, right? You can't start something whole cloth, but if you have a seed that you can nurture, you can get something to grow from it, even in a sort of artificial manufactured way.
And Cor, we're kind of seeing that in Calgary as well, right? We have University Heights that's being developed, land across from a university, but that was developed a bit differently, right? Townhouses that unfortunately will possibly be out of the grasp of master students who want to rent. So, and then looking at Toronto, I know that you're familiar with Toronto and it being, the 16th most innovative city by Startup Genome, or 18th. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like the 15-minute economic development or 45-minute economic development kind of conversation?
Well, I can certainly talk about how when my colleagues are out traveling, specifically in places like LA and Houston, they come back and tell you how incredibly frustrating it is and how they're not super excited to go to those places because you spend, 10 hours and you meet only 2 people. And so they would certainly be proponents of 15-minute economic development. I think that's one of the things here in Calgary that we do that we're trying to do, we are trying to, one, kind of expand the variety of mobility, to expand mobility for people, right? So we're trying to improve walkability and cycling, and whether or not people, agree with the direction that we're going, or whether or not they agree that we're making any advancements. But I think that's all part of it, that we want people to be closer together so that they can get together and do creative things together. We do kind of talk about the connectivity of, again, using that mass transit, that the companies that are located downtown and even many of the startups that are located downtown, that on the mass transit line, you also have the Polytechnic and the Research University. And so you can easily move up and down and between them. And so hopefully facilitating interaction and some of those collisions that Greg was talking about earlier. You know, I think I'm a proponent of, you know, that's if we're calling it 15-minute economic development, of things being easily accessed, relatively easily accessed, so that people can be together and co-create. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good thing. I think it's something that we're, you know, striving towards in Calgary. That isn't to say that we don't have a long way to go. But I'll also comment on the, you know, like the organic versus the manufactured. It's, you know, maybe the manufactured is pure manufactured, but there's no such thing as like the pure organic. Toronto did not accidentally, downtown Toronto did not accidentally appear the way it is. There were conscious choices made for it to be the way it is and where things are co-located. There's a reason they built Mars where they did.
Great point. And Mars started off as health focused, being right beside the hospitals there.
And
go ahead.
I was going to mention Frank Olmsted, who did a lot of the designing in the Boston area. I currently live in a Frank Olmsted suburb, so it's extremely manufactured, just extremely manufactured in 1880 to 1900, where they were expecting people to live on a walkable scale.
So the suburb that you live in is walkable?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I also wanted to hear Hyder's thoughts on this, especially, you know, connecting with a lot of new Canadians who, you know, some come from places that are quite dense. And so what are your thoughts on this, Hyder? And what do you think its relationship is with new innovative Canadians who are coming to our country to create amazing companies and jobs?
Thank you for that. I think the video that you showed there, I don't know why, but every single person that spoke there, the tagline was sense of belonging, right? Because they're trying to attract new community members and they're trying to keep them there. So I was just thinking about Bitsy's comment that imagine if they had done that, you know, a little bit earlier, maybe Bitsy would have said yes to living if she had all the amenities that she wanted, right, in the current neighborhood. So that's how we're looking at the newcomer dilemma, because currently where we're in downtown west side of the light rail transit on 8th Street Station, which is kind of removed from the action in inner city. The number one feedback that we receive from newcomers that come to our country, and you know what, Ron, it's really interesting, the countries that you mentioned that are currently innovating, right? So we're actually we're plucking them out from their state and then bringing them here. And literally everyone has said to me, in Calgary, after 5 p.m., we are a dead city, right? So downtown is empty because we just work there and they move out to the suburbs. And that, honestly, I didn't think it was a big deal. I mean, when I moved from Waterloo to Calgary, I noticed the same thing as well. But then, you know, you get used to it. But for some of the newcomers, they almost wanted to move away from Calgary because of that reason, because there's nothing to do, no colliding, as we called it. So our lease is expiring in March or next year. So there's a couple of scoping that we had to do to ensure that we can have entrepreneurs, economic immigrants collide. And one of the hubs that we looked at was right across Calgary Economic Development, like the Bow Tower, you know, that kind of area, so that newcomers coming in. We have a new deal with Platform Calgary, which is one of the tech hubs as well, like what Greg is working on. So that's one there. And then we have, you know, we have an opportunity to be anywhere in the city, right? So then we looked at how about an all-in-one space where we can design it to create sense of belonging, you know, have like a coffee shop and a tea shop. You come in and you wait in a lounge area where you're greeted and somebody says, welcome to Canada to you. We're hosting orientation sessions on a regular basis. So all these ideas are there, but the problem is after 5 p.m., even our downtown in front of Calgary Economic Development is completely Like is empty, even now more than before because of the pandemic. So, this is an ongoing challenge of mine, and I have to decide on this in the next 2-3 months because, as I said, like our lease is expiring. Now, for the Gateway program, we've launched 3 specialized streams to help with this situation and transition. One is the economic entrepreneur stream. So there's going to be a newcomer planning specialist that throws out the red carpet treatment, pre-arrival, arrival, and post-arrival. And that's where we have a lot of coalition with the Calgary Economic Development. We have Platform Calgary. Greg, I think I'm going to reach out to you in the future to see, once we get a little bit of maturity, I think, because I think your clientele would probably be a little bit more mature in the life cycle of the business. The second stream is economic immigrants who want to land in jobs, especially with tech. So again, where do we want them to have their onboarding experiences? Think about the first time, you joined an organization and what kind of HR processes were built in to ensure that you had a successful onboarding. That's, I think, our role in City of Calgary. And the last thing I'd like to say, Ron, is maybe next time we do this, you're showing a video about Calgary, and maybe Cord is the main actor there because he's such a good looking guy. And then, we're showcasing Calgary and their innovations. So anyway, those are my 2 cents. It was a good question that you asked.
We will all come together.
I was going to jump in and Heider and say, like if right outside of our offices, if at 5 o'clock it's, even outside of CED it's dead, it's because we're all still inside working. But, and I know we're supposed to be relentlessly promoting downtown, but maybe the space you want to be is actually the Beltline, because I think that's kind of where everything is at. And that's where Greg almost lives in the Beltline, and he works in the Beltline, and we all hang out in the Beltline, and yeah.
Yes. So we'll come together.
Ideas for doing some stuff. Yeah, well, we have some ideas for downtown, but it's all, what's important about this, I think the word that we're circling around here is community. Like there needs to be community. Like when you look at these places, whether it's Kendall or you're looking at downtown Toronto there too, right? Like you live in these places. And, going back to Bitsy's point about specialization, it's not just people who specialize, but places do too. And one of the biggest problems we have in North America is a total lack of identity within places. Like within the city of Calgary, even there are very low identity magnets around different things, which are the things that create that sense of belonging. I've become associated with something that has meaning to me. But if where I am is the same as everywhere else, or I just have this big blob of of buildings that I go to work, and then I go to a blob of houses at night, we miss out on that identity, which is so important to create community.
That's a great point. I've been told by William that we're way behind and we need to speed up. So the next couple of ideas, I'm just going to kind of shoot through it. Okay. So just give me 1 sec. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to kind of talk about Canada. So we've talked about this correlation between density.
Just like Heider talk. Heider can talk about Canada.
We talk about this correlation between density and innovation. So in Canada, we have a population of 37.5 million people, almost that of California. Of the 37.5, 30.3 are categorized to be living in cities. But when we dive deeper into those numbers, only 4.2 million live in very dense environments, while 26 million still live in the suburbs. So I'm not going to ask this question, but it's just something to ponder is that an economic disadvantage to Canada? Does it make us less economically productive if so few of us live in more denser environments? So, just a thought for everyone to consider. But the next topic I want to talk about is diverging economies. So in 2019, Brookings published an interesting article that referenced the Wall Street Journal data set. What they found was that over the past 10 years, there's been a divergence in economic activity. A smaller number of geographic areas as a small number of geographic areas are taking an increasing share of the economic pie. In other words, and just like in previous industrial revolutions, there are those who are adapting to the demands of the new economy and those who are not doing as well. The researchers argue that these two Americas are not just divided with economic activity. The people who reside in these areas live in two different worlds. And the Conference Board of Canada in 2019 in their Outlook report identified something similar happening in Canada. So I guess my two questions are, first of all, why do you think there are certain regions in North America that are not adapting? And what do you think are some of the outcomes that we're witnessing because of this economic divergence, with a lack of opportunity in certain parts of the country and more opportunity in other parts of the country? This includes the US and Canada, and actually most of the Western world. So, Haider, I was wondering if you could chime in on this. Like why do you think that's the case, and what are some of the things that you're seeing as the outcome of this divergence?
I can speak from a Canadian perspective, and then I'll defer to our panelists. Maybe Bitsy can provide some really good context from a North American perspective. But for example, from a newcomer lens, you know, the three cities that in our research studies, when we asked our newcomers, okay, where do you want to live in Canada? Guess what the three cities are? It's Toronto, it's Vancouver, it's Montreal. And, you know, it's the perception I guess when people Google Canada, those are the things that pop up. If you're French heritage, you'll naturally gravitate towards Montreal. So, you know, and then the second thing that we learned is that, you know, right now with cost of living, that's a huge part, plays a huge part in sense of belonging. So you look at housing prices in Vancouver, you know, there's skyrocketed, like, you know, a newcomer on just coming to Canada can't afford that lifestyle. So I think I'll also defer to Court, because I know the Calgary Economic Development is attracting talent based on the fact that, you know, we have a good quality of life, you know, associating IT and clouds with mountains and a lot of like interesting marketing that I'm not a marketing guru, but, you know, so maybe Court can talk about that. So is it working? I'll give you an example of that. A few months ago, somebody reached out to me for coffee, and I noticed that they were a high-end entrepreneur from California. And so I accepted the coffee meeting. It was half an hour chat later. They told me that they were attracted to Calgary because of some of the ads that CED has put out, that this is a place where something new and exciting is happening. And then they started listing all the incubators from green, what is called rainforest to platform to thin air labs to, so I think people that are attracted to our culture here in Calgary, they're also attracted also because of our legacy of our forefathers, because people prior to us came here from mainly prairie regional provinces. And the idea here was that you can come from anywhere in the country and meritocracy prevails here and you can get it done, quote unquote. So you'll hear that a lot in Calgary, we get it done and so on and so forth. So it's that fail fast forward mentality. So I think, you know, Calgary is such a unique city. I'm looking at your graphs here. And we recently did a heat map for all the newcomers that are coming through the Gateway program. And my thinking was disrupted, because guess what? The heat map is showing the newcomers are actually settling in all areas of Calgary now, including downtown. So the heat map looks like a blob. so we have to zone in. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of perspective on what's happening here. But again, what's also interesting about Calgary and Alberta, we see the second highest intra-migration. So people land in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, but then they hear about our entrepreneurial culture, perhaps lower taxes, low cost of housing, and they get attracted here. So that's those are a few points that I think I would like to make.
Yeah, Bitsy, did you want to chime in on this with regards to any divergence that you're seeing in economic productivity in the U.S. And anything that you see that is an outcome because of that, like, you know, certain places have more economic opportunity than others.
This is such a big topic. It's really even hard to wrap my head around it, especially since right now in the US, we are nearly literally, if not literally, at armed conflict between these two places right now. So, you know, but I think that the cost of living is really primary. I was very convinced, there are a few papers that have blown my mind in the world, and I was very convinced by this one particular paper by Peter Gannon that looked at migration within the US. And up until the 1970s, migration mostly moved to the more productive areas from the less productive areas. But then it basically stopped, and only highly educated people moved to the more productive areas because they're the only people who could command the kinds of salaries that were needed to get housing there. And less educated people tended to migrate then to the less productive areas because their salaries would go farther. They would get housing. And so I think that there is something really fundamental about the cost of housing and education that's driving this divide, and I think it's somewhat global.
And what are your thoughts on this, Court? Are you seeing similar things when you dive into statistics around Canada and this economic divergence?
You know what, I mean, I think some other things have happened in Canada of, you know, like, you know, historically how people are, you know, drawn from one city over another. And I think that even, you know, for quite some time, it's migration from outside of Canada that has been our driver of population growth. But I think there's also definitely historical kind of vestiges of, you know, like 30 or 40 or 50 years ago where economies started to slow down and youth started to leave. And that exodus of youth, I think, was kind of never really stopped. And it was kind of an inevitable downfall, especially on the East Coast, right? But I think that we should also, you know, like, you know, I grew up in a small rural town in northern Alberta. And I think also that somehow in our policies, and, you know, and I'm not going to say that we should, you know, just let go of all of those places that aren't changing. But, you know, through our history, there's been an ebb and flow of people and economic activity. And I don't know that our governments should be investing a lot of effort in propping up those places that are not changing. But I'm going to place Calgary firmly in the square of a place that is changing. And even if you look at some of the charts that are on the page, you know, like Calgary does have, you know, a growing non-white population. You know, that you know, one of the interesting things that, you know, people aren't aware of, especially here in Canada, that we're the third most ethnically diverse or visible minority diverse city in the country. And most people wouldn't think that. And specifically over the last, you know, recent history, maybe 15 years, the growth of the non-white population has been high. And so we have proven that we are a place that is attracting foreign-born, that is attracting visible minorities. I know life isn't, you know, that we haven't gotten everything right and things aren't perfect here, but the city is changing. You know, I think I think statistically too in Canada that, you know, maybe in a little bit contrast to the United States, that we, again, not to say that we live in a utopian society, but we live in a society with a bit more equity. And so there's maybe a bit more of a balance of, you know, the people who historically have had less opportunity maybe have the chance to be around people with more opportunity, and that our neighborhoods are maybe not as divergent as they are in the United States. And that we have kind of equalization and access to quality education and those kinds of things that I think maybe give some of our cities a bit of a boost when it comes to economic activity.
And we're going to stick with that conversation about diversity. So we're going into our next section of the conversation. William says, I need to start the conclusion, but I'm not going to start the conclusion. Folks, we're going to take a little bit longer in this conversation. My apologies. but we're gonna relate economic development to equity now. So we're gonna go back one. So this one I'm not gonna ask the question for because we do need to move forward, but it's long been understood that certain people in society don't participate in our economy equally. Through the lens of the new industrial period, the ability to access capital becomes very essential. Yet we know that women, the LGBTQ2S+ community, people with disabilities, indigenous communities, and people of color have a harder time accessing capital when compared to white men. And this has been shown through data set after data set. And the question, and something I would like everyone to ponder, is this idea of like, why is it that certain communities or certain groups do not have access to capital? And as part of that, I guess the conversation also plays into who has capital and who doesn't. So just for something for everyone to consider. We're not going to ask a question for this slide just because William is telling me I need to conclude. But I have one more slide, okay? So in 2017, Raj Chetty and Alex Bell of Harvard and Xavier Jarvel of the London School of Economics took a look at 1 million patents that had been filed between 1996 to 2014. And link them to federal tax returns. They're able to track patent holders from childhood to adulthood. I think Bitsy is very, very familiar with patents because that's what she did in her research, which we were going to discuss, but because of time, we are not. So, but they're able to track them from childhood to adulthood, and they found a few things. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Number one, if you grew up in an affluent family and were a high performer in math, you were much more likely to make successful innovations than kids with a low ability, like low ability in math specifically. If you grew up in a poor family, but were also a high performer in math, you were as likely to make a successful innovation as kids who had low ability. So you have high ability, but your ability to create innovation or create patents are as limited as those with low abilities when it comes to math. So your ability to seem to not matter. If your family is part of the 1%, you are 10 times more likely to become an inventor compared to families below the median income. And the last piece here, and this I think is a huge piece, if women, minorities, and children from low-income families had the ability to invent at the same rate as white men from families with incomes in the top 20%, the rate of innovation in the US would quadruple. So a lot to take in there, but essentially what it's saying is that if you're really good at math and you come from a well-off family, you have a high level possibility of creating a patent. If you have a high ability in math, but you don't come from a wealthy family, you have the same capacity to create a patent as someone who has a low ability in math. So my question is this, if we as two countries want to be increasingly competitive in the world, in this new economy, does the conversation of inequality change? Because we see over many data sets the relationship between high levels of inequality and less innovation, and less levels of inequality and higher levels of innovation. So I think where we'll go to first is Greg. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this topic.
I mean, the takeaway here is that wealth follows wealth, and there have been some structural changes in the economy over the last many years, which have, hardened this quite significantly. And I know that there's, when you talk to a lot of people who are coming from vulnerable groups or minority communities who say, even when it comes to starting your own company and everything, there's usually a lot more advice than there is capital, that people are willing to give. And, I would say, like, here from Thin Air's perspective, like, our bet on the future is partly driven by trying to overturn this. So we clearly see the power of innovation more, like, if the resources are more properly distributed, if we build ecosystems that are based on, we love Kate Rayworth's idea of donut economics that are based on, you build social foundations, and of which equity is a huge piece of that. And you stay inside the planetary boundaries so that we have a livable planet. There's a huge band of economic explosive opportunity that exists in that space. But it's going to take people who are willing to challenge what has become a bit of a structural problem. That means that we can't just give advice to entrepreneurs who are people of color and say, gee, good luck, and then continue to shovel all of the actual capital into the usual hands. It's going to require choices by a lot of us to restructure this in a meaningful way, because if we cannot improve the equity around wealth distribution, the presence of capital to support the growth of innovative ideas, they're not going to go anywhere. And we'll be standing here having this conversation 10 years from now, and it'll be even worse. So, as somebody who's looking to support and help design the ideas that will take us into a livable future where we can all do really well, like this to us is job number one, has to be done. Like, we have to find a way, and it can't be lip service. We have to, like, dig in, actually put some ways in motion with capital attached to it that is going to drive that kind of innovation, because it will definitely happen if we can create that community and support it properly.
And Court, I know that in your past you've dealt with a lot of the issues relating to tackling inequality, and now you work in economic development. So how do you find the community, the innovation community? How do they talk about tackling inequality? Is this even a topic at the table?
I think it depends on whose table you're sitting at. If you're sitting at the table with Greg, then the answer is yes. That, I think one of the things that I like about Calgary in this place is that, or at least it's the people that I gravitate towards, that we do have conversations about equality. We do have conversations about trying to break down barriers, where I know people who are specifically, trying to consciously making different decisions to try and break down barriers. I think we in general, we know as a community that a more equitable community is a more resilient community. It's a community where we need to have a place where that, the fact that a good idea can come from anywhere, that needs to be true, right? That the good idea needs to be supported no matter where it comes from. I think as a community, we know that that's something that we need to try and strive towards. So it is in my circles and the people that I talk to about economic development and what we're trying to do in the city, that I believe that to be true. It's something that we do talk about. It is something that we're trying to change.
And Bitsy, what are your thoughts on what's happening in the U.S. With regards to Black Lives Matter? And I'm seeing, more venture capital firms being created by people of color, but also for women, right? I'm seeing women-led venture capital who are investing in women, but most of the money still is with, white men. So, what are your thoughts on that? How, have you seen efforts in the U.S. Around breaking that down and giving more people access so we can everyone has the opportunity to live a great life?
I think that one of my takeaways from Black Lives Matter right now in my current sort of community that I'm in is that actually in the US, affirmative action has not solved any problems by any chance, but it's moved the conversation forward such that we can have it's moved us forward such that we can have the conversation, because it has started to put women, it has started to put people of color in the room with white men such that they can say, oh, look, there's a real problem here, and now we can begin to actually have the conversation, whereas before they were just in separate rooms. Again, this is one of those other, like, this topic is so large, I don't even know how to think about it. But I do think we're in a cultural fight right now around equity and inclusion, particularly around wealth redistribution and income redistribution. And it's a fight rather than something we're making progress on.
And when I think about, you know, the conversation around white privilege, and when I think about that, I also have started thinking about wealth privilege, and they are, you know, very closely aligned, but you know, my hope is that in the future, the wealthiest in Canada and in the US are more diverse. But then with that, do you end up keeping the effort to continue to make progress on the race issue or the gender issue? Because now you're wealthy, and does it put you in a position to not push for things because you've pushed for things so hard for so long that you're like, oh, I'm tired. I'm just tired. So yeah, the topic of wealth privilege. So we're gonna get into our next topic here, and it's only one question. I'm gonna ask each of you this question, and it's about advice for leaders, right? So if there was a city leader out there who needed some advice about how to better prepare his or her city for the fourth industrial revolution, if there's one thing that you would tell them, and I know, Bitsy, this is you could probably list off a number of things, but if there's one thing that comes to the top of your head, and we've talked about a number of them in this conversation, what would that be? And yeah, let's start with Bitsy on this one.
I think I'd talk about education. So I think that in the second industrial revolution, what really propelled us forward was the high school movement, having people with more education, with more general education coming into the workforce and filling up all levels of the workforce. And so I think we need to push on that here. I think coding is a basic literacy skill that everyone should be having access to. I think generalized university education, that's general, not vocational university education, is something that far more people should be getting access to. And so I would encourage city leaders to really think about how they're building their population up, as well as, I said, housing costs.
And I know Greg is totally on board with what you just said, so I'm going to go to Court next. So Greg will come up with a different topic other than education. So, so Court, did you want to chime in? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Court.
Maybe you need to go to Greg because I.
Well, it looks like Court has some technical difficulties, so we're going to see if Hyder's available.
Oh, I'm back.
Okay, you're back. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
Just hovering the cursor makes it go. I'm going to make education part and parcel of my answer. I think my answer is, like, for sure, like, we talk a lot about talent, but I'm going to reflect on our strategy. To me, it's collaboration and partnerships. You need to have partners in all corners of your community in order to raise your community up. For me, it takes a village to raise an economy.
Awesome. Takes a village. Greg, other than education and possibly other than partnerships, is there something, because I know those two are probably at the top of your head.
They're not.
They're not.
No,
okay.
it wasn't. Neither one of them was going to be my answer. Although both of them are fantastic answers. And this one I think will make a nice the way they all kind of tie together. To me, the answer is place. Like when we talk about talent and things like that, it used to be that you could, like Flint, Michigan, you could build a big automobile manufacturing plant and people would go there to get the job from, the company that put the big plant. We know now that place is driving economy. So, I mean, if we cannot, civic leaders need to think about the fact that how do we create the container that attracts talent, that people want to be here? So, Hyder made a point about that. The people who said, hey, you know what, the streets roll up at 5 o'clock, that's not cool. We don't really want to hang out here. That's a problem. And when people in Calgary and other cities say, I don't really want to build bike lanes and all that hippie stuff, then what they have to understand, though, is that when people try to go to Vancouver and can't stick there because the cost of living is too high, housing particularly, there's a rebound effect. And this is happening in North America. So what happens is when those people rebound from that impenetrable barrier of housing costs, they're going to start looking for places to land that look like the kind of place that they want to live. So if you look at cities like Austin in the United States, they've done a tremendous job of starting to build that kind of, place that's going to attract those kinds of people. So to me, that's the whole thing. You have to build the place. There can be no connections and community without place. Like that has to be the core of it, and it has to have a big payback in terms of its vibrancy, like the social interactivity of the place and its visibility of that vibrancy, because that's where people are going to bounce to. I have a colleague in San Francisco who runs an engineering firm, and he told me, I cannot hire somebody from outside of the Bay Area because the housing cost bump is so large, even for very successful professionals in other parts of the country, they cannot afford to move here, which then means that's that great example of that forces this bounce back into other communities. So my advice for civic leaders is build great places that people will want to be and companies will want to go to because talent loves going there. Any city that misses out on that is going to suffer big time in the fourth industrial revolution.
So that was awesome. I love the three pieces of advice: invest in education, invest in creating partnerships and connection, and invest in place. And that is going to lead us into the conclusion of our event this evening. First off, I'd like to just thank you, all four of you, for attending. I think Hyder, Hyder's back. Okay, so Hyder, before we get to the conclusion, is there one thing?
Our 3-month-old daughter is with me right now. Because
there we go.
That's why. Yeah.
What's her name?
Maya.
Does she want to tell us what? No. So what's the one thing that you would invest in, Hyder?
Yes.
I
really like what Bitsy, Court, and Greg said. I think Greg really brought it to a close there. For me, it's the same thing, sense of belonging. So our mission is unleash the economic, social, and civic potential of our newcomers that come to Calgary. There's some magic in that. I mean, if you think about the unleashing the economic potential, right? That means you have a good job, housing, social determinants of health. Social, I can now hang out at 5 p.m. with other people. Canadians, I've heard about these Calgarians that they're really friendly, open people, and I want to, make friends. That's second. Third, okay, I became a Canadian citizen. Now I can actually run for office or support politicians. So that's big. So I think I'll go back to the HR onboarding process for any world-class organization. Pre-arrival newcomers, they get on the Gateway program. Arrival, we rolled out the red carpet treatment. make sure as soon as they get here, they know exactly where they're going to live, where their kids are going to go to school, and most importantly, the friendships that they're going to develop. And there's a lot of research that says that cross-cultural friendships, mentorship, whatever you want to call it, leads to increased sense of belonging. So that's my closing comment as well. And I really appreciate the fact that I was on this panel. Thank you.
Yeah, you keep on bringing up the point of new Canadians and interacting. And when you have a downtown that, you know, dies after 5 o'clock, is very difficult. I have a friend who is a new Canadian, and she told me she can only afford to rent a place in the southern part of the city. She can't rent downtown, she can't afford it. But then, you know, she wants to hang out with people. So, but then downtown goes dead, and then her friends live in the Northeast. So then for her to travel from the Southwest to the Northeast, it becomes really difficult. And loneliness, you know, all the statistics around loneliness and its impact. And if we can build a more welcoming Calgary, not saying that Calgary is not welcoming, but welcoming in the sense of how we build connectivity amongst people, new Canadians and those who have been here for a while. So that is going to conclude our event this evening. I want to thank you all for attending. Our guests, but also our panelists, Bitsy, Court, Greg, and Hyder. We have our after party after this event, so folks click on the link and join us there. I'd like to thank our webcast production team. They're very large and very strong, and they put in a lot of hard work to get this up and running. You can follow us on most social, well, I think pretty much, yeah, most social media platforms. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website, imagincities.com. If you know people, companies, organizations who would be interested in our work, encourage them to connect with us and join our community. We say that we're building a community of creative problem solvers. And stay tuned as we pilot more projects and programs to strengthen cities. If you go on our website, you'll see that we're launching an innovation platform and an education platform that we intend to roll out projects for. And feedback is always appreciated. We're always looking to get better. So thank you for joining us this evening, and have a good night.